So I've got this piece of Sipo. Sipo is kind of like an African mahogany. It's got the same characteristics, or similar characteristics, a nice color. So I'm going to make some outdoor lights to go near our front entrance. So let's get started.
I started with a sketch to help figure out the dimensions. The lamp has a post in each corner, a 2-inch post, and an angled piece on the top that the light will reflect off. So I started by cutting the Sipo into rough lengths, and then I took some leftover walnut that I had from another project and I just planed it lightly on each side. I did this prior to taking it over to the bandsaw where I'm going to resaw it. So the walnut is going to be used to form an enclosure, and it also joins the corner post together. I'm going to route slots into the walnut, and that will allow the light to shine through. So I'm cutting this into a thickness just a little over 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch is my desired thickness after it's planed. And I run the resawn material through the planer. All the pieces will be the same thickness. And now I'm taking the Sipo and I'm cutting, or roughly cutting the corner posts. These are going to end up being about 2 inches by 2 inches square. These are back to the walnut pieces. I'm just cutting them to the right width. And here's sort of a concept that I drew on the computer for what it's going to look like. I put a stop block at each end of the router table so that I could have the same position each time. The slots will be exactly the same length, starting and stopping at the same position. In my drawing I had 5 slots that I was originally planning to cut, but I decided to limit it to just 3. I think that gave it a simpler look. And then I used the dado set to cut out the portions on the outside edge. I had all 4 pieces clamped together so that they would all be cut the same dimension. Once I had made the first cut, I flipped one of the pieces over to use it as a guide for the remaining cuts. That way I didn't have to remeasure and redraw it. In my original sketch, I was going to use a 30-degree angle for the top piece. So the purpose of the top piece is to protect the light from the weather, from rain and snow, but also to provide a reflective surface for the LED light that's going to shine up on it. But I changed my mind and I went with a 20-degree angle. So I'm cutting dados into the corner post now for the top piece to fit into. And then I'm carefully marking it on the other piece. After cutting the first 2 posts, I flipped the angle around the other way for the other 2 posts on the other side of the lamp. I'm going to put a bottom into the lamp. The bottom is going to hold the LED light in place. So I'm cutting dados in the post to hold the piece in place. The bulb has a diameter of 1 13/16 inches. 1 7/8 inch Forstner bit would have been perfect, but I don't have one, so I used a 1 3/4 inch bit. 2 inches would have been too big. So I'm cutting a hole in the center of the board, and it makes a pretty good fit for the LED bulb. And then I'm just putting an electrical box on the bottom of that. That will help to weatherproof the electrical connections. And then I cut a 20-degree bevel on each end of the top piece. The lamps are going to be outdoors, so I'm using a spar varnish to help stand up to the wet conditions. This particular varnish has a satin finish, which turned out to look pretty nice. I used the time while the finish was drying to remove the tree that is in the place where the lamp is going to go, or one of the lamps. So I thought that I might not have to cut the tree down because it seems to have a fairly shallow root system. So I'm cutting off the branches first, and then I'm going to use the leverage of the trunk to see if I can pull it out. And sure enough, with a little bit of effort, but not too much, I was able to get the tree root completely out of the ground. In addition to the walnut pieces that are going to join the legs together, I'm going to use a clear acrylic sheet to also join the legs together and help protect from the weather. So I'm using an 1/8 inch router bit to cut slots into the legs. And then I'm cutting a 20-degree bevel on the top end of each leg. So here's the acrylic sheet, and I'm cutting it into the required dimension. I don't remember the exact size, but I think it was about 9.5 inches by 17 inches high, something like that. So now it's time to begin the assembly. Put the acrylic sheets into the slots first and the bottom, and now I'm inserting the top into the dado that I cut. I'm joining it together simply with deck screws. Originally I was going to glue it and then use deck screws and then insert some plugs with some kind of a contrasting color, but I think the screws will be fine. And then I put a couple of coats, actually 3 coats I think, 3 coats of spar varnish on the legs and the top. And now it's time to mark out the placement of the walnut grills. I'll call them grills for lack of a better term. They're about 6 inches from the bottom. And then I used a knife to mark out where I'm going to cut the mortises with the router. And then I used a chisel to make the knife lines a little bit more pronounced so that I could see them easily when I'm doing the routing. I've got a 3/8 inch bit in the router, and I'm carefully cutting it out just by hand. I'm not using an edge guide or anything. I definitely would if this was fine furniture I was making. And then cleaning it up with a chisel. And now I'm testing the fit on the one side. And then once the one side that I've cut is inserted, then I'll use the chisel to cut out the other side, just to mark for the router. And now it's time to see how it fits. And it's a pretty nice tight fit. So now I'm just going to glue it and clamp it. This was kind of a tedious process because I did one side at a time, had to wait for the glue to set. It took me about 30 minutes to mark and route out each of the mortises. So 30 minutes per side, so with 8 sides, it was just a little over 2 hours that it took me to do this. Plus the glue up time, it was probably 3 hours total to get this all assembled and glued up. I'm glad that I put the spar finish on the insides of the walnut grills before assembly, because it would be impossible to do now with the acrylic sheets in place. And now I'm just putting a coat on the outside. And now I'm marking the leg positions on the top of a patio stone. The reason for this is I don't want the legs to be sitting on the soil or in the soil. So I'm drilling 1/4-inch holes into the corners of the patio stone, and then I will use a 3.5-inch 1/4-inch bolt to extend up through the stone and into the legs. So after drilling the holes into the concrete, now I'm drilling 1/4-inch holes up into the legs. And now I'm going to put the bolts into position. I've got a fender washer on the bottom side, a fender washer on top, and then a nut. And what the nut will do is it will hold the legs up even a little bit higher, so that way if it rains and there's moisture on the stone, the legs will be raised up a little bit. So I think this is a pretty good solution for keeping it isolated from the moisture. So I already have some low voltage lamps near our front entrance, so I'm going to remove those and use the existing wiring and wire up the lamps just with the 2 wires. I'm using wire nuts and some black electrical tape just to seal it off from the rain. And that's it, they work. Time to clean up. The lamps look nice in daylight and nice when it gets dark out as well. So I gotta ask, would you make it?